I grew up in the Army. My dad was a career warrant officer and was really in the Army until practically I graduated from college and went into the Army myself for 4 years. Growing up in the Army, back in those days, soldiers didn't make a lot of money, and so I went on to college on an Army ROTC scholarship, which provided part of the cost. Worked a lot during college, sold class rings, sold sandwiches, parked cars, worked in housing construction during the summers. And then after graduating from college, went into the Army, went in as a second lieutenant, came out as a captain, worked in computers primarily for the Army Security Agency, which was a branch of military intelligence. After the Army, I went to law school, went to Duke Law School. GI Bill helped there too, so I kind of double dipped on my military service. Also worked as a computer programmer for the city part-time and worked during the summers. Started practicing law 34 years ago in a small firm in Seattle and did appeals, well, some trial work, but primarily appeals in just about every area of the law, both criminal and civil. As a result of that, I've done hundreds and hundreds of appeals, about 50 appeals probably in the Supreme Court and hundreds in our state courts of appeals, in the federal courts of appeals. I was appointed to Division II of the Court of Appeals, which is in Tacoma, in 1995 by Governor Lowry to fill the unexpired term of Gary Alexander when he was elected to the Supreme Court. Spent a year on the court, went back into private practice. Since then, I've practiced, instead of going back to Seattle, I hung out my shingle on Bainbridge Island, where I've lived for 30 years, and have done exclusively appellate law, but have done some trial work, too, as a judge. I've worked as a pro tem judge, some in King County, but primarily in Jefferson County up in Port Townsend. That's a one-judge county, and they often need someone to come in. That's an interesting experience because everyone has to agree that you can be a fair judge for purposes of that. So I've had experience on both sides of the trials as a lawyer and as a judge, and both sides of appellate practice as a lawyer and a judge. Also had a lot of experience with the lawyer discipline process. The Supreme Court is in charge of lawyer discipline, but the Bar Association handles the trials with volunteer lawyers deciding whether a lawyer who's accused of misconduct broke some of the ethical rules and should be disciplined. So I've done that as well. I was appointed as the chair of that body that makes the recommendations to the Supreme Court. So that's another type of job that the Supreme Court does where I've had experience. The court also is in charge of rules, and I've been on the Rules Committee for the State Bar making recommendations to the court on what rules should be adopted. So I think I've had a broad experience. I'd love to hear your questions now and respond more directly to the issues that are of concern to all of you.
There's an increasing amount of money involved in judicial races nationwide. What is your reaction to this trend?
I think it's a bad trend, frankly. We don't have enough money in judicial races in a way. I mean, at one level, it's very hard to run a judicial race. These are statewide campaigns, and it's not like the governor's race that attracts a lot of interest and a lot of contributions. So it's hard to run a race, and you're always, you have to organize a committee to raise money. However, I do think it's a real problem with the money that has been going in, because we have special interest money and business money going in, essentially trying to elect people to the bench that they think will further their agenda. That's why I lobbied the legislature to extend campaign finance limits to judicial elections. That's a bill that was passed in 2006, as you probably know. Oddly enough, until 2006, every state elected office, there was a campaign finance limit, an amount you could not exceed in donations to that position. Judges were exempt from that. And so I went down to the legislature and testified. I worked with bar groups to get this passed, and it was passed in 2006. That's not the only answer to the question, though, because in addition to that, we have PAC money going in from business PACs that are that can exceed the campaign finance limit. And so I have proposed a rule to the Supreme Court of the state of Washington, a rule that I helped draft and shepherded through committees and through task forces, and it's now before the Supreme Court. And what this rule would say is that if a party in a lawsuit has given more or spent more than a certain amount of money to get a judge elected, that judge can't sit on that party's case. That seems like a no-brainer to me. It turns out it's a pretty controversial rule, and I think you'll find that's a difference between me and the Justice Sanders, whom I'm running against and who you'll be talking to next. He's not in favor of campaign finance limits. The other area that I'm interested in here, worked on here, is public financing of judicial campaigns. I've been down to the legislature and testified in favor of public financing because I think that if we could get to public financing, that would be all of the people of the state would be contributing money to that campaign, and there wouldn't be this effort to pour a lot of money into one candidate's campaign by special interests.
Do you support the right of court employees to join a union with full collective bargaining rights?
Yes, I don't see any reason why court employees should be treated differently than other employees.